Welcome back and good evening if you've just joined us. This is ANN7 Prime with me, Cindy Mabi.
And I'm Edwin Kaswe.
And our top story this half hour, 4 days after the ANN7 expose on irregularities in Treasury's IFMS project, the Finance Minister has taken note and expressed concerns over the internal audit into the integrated financial management system that revealed gross financial mismanagement at the department. And now it's time for part 2 of the mega ANN7 expose from the same internal audit papers of National Treasury.
Today we focus on specific deals with KPMG for the Integrated Financial Management System project. Over the next hour, ANN7 will tell you how KPMG was awarded 59 million rand despite not having any terms of reference or appointment contracts for Probity Services 1 in line with the supply chain management processes.
And there are other revelations or findings which we'll bring you in the next hour, but the impact of these transgressions, according to the internal Treasury report, is lack of accountability, non-compliance with supply chain processes, unauthorized expenditure, and ineffective project management. I'm going to go to my colleague now, Audrey Chimwanda, for the first set of revelations in the internal audit report regarding KPMG.
Thank you very much, Cindy, and to you, Edwin. Very good evening to our viewers at home. Thank you for joining us. Now, here's a list of some of the issues that we found with regards to KPMG and their non-contract, as it appears, with the National Treasury. First, there is no evidence of terms of reference. There is also no evidence of appointment of KPMG for Probity Services number 1, which is in line with the supply management processes. Also, the impact that it has is there's a lack of accountability. There is no compliance to the supply chain processes, and that leads to unauthorized expenditure. We also cannot ignore the irregular expenditure. Also, potential fruitless and wasteful expenditure can be expected from a contract that really has nothing to fall back on. Ineffective contract management also leads to no legal recourse to tie KPMG to with regards to the terms of a reference. Recommendations going forward: management should ensure that the terms of reference are in place to ensure requirements of service as well as expectations are defined going forward. This finding has already been reported to the National Treasury by the internal audit, and it has been resolved. Now, the auditor's comments with regards to what came from management is the fact that action was taken against those who have found to have transgressed the law in allowing this to happen does not necessarily improve the internal control deficiency, hence the recommendations that were made. And that's all we have for now. Cindy, back to you and Edwin in studio and your guests.
Thanks so much, Audrey, and we'll dip in with Audrey as we unpack the KPMG contract that has been signed without any terms of reference or scope of the work and even timesheets that were not submitted. So let's invite our guest in studio who will be helping us unpack this particular one. Mosiri Tsiane is with the South African Liberty Foundation as the chairperson, and Spax Samutseki, National Coordinator. Well, he'll join us for a later debate, but nonetheless, it's good to have you. The more, the merrier. Let's start with you, Mosiri. I mean, you've just heard now that maybe if we talk about when you are awarded a government contract, there are obviously certain processes. Bidding needs to be open and transparent, especially more so for Treasury. And in this case, KPMG did work without any paper trail as to how they got to get the contract in the first place.
Well, it's one of those bizarre appointments that you can find within our Treasury, and the continuation of an abuse of the systems in there are reflected clearly. And the nation should know that, those that are seems to be entitled to a certain service are not necessarily entitled to it. Like all of us, when you have to be appointed in providing a specific service for government, you need to go to the necessary processes. There is nothing that says that others are born to be entitled, let alone those that are having a 50-year contract in ESCOM. You can imagine that some are more, in what we call the animal farm. Some are more equal than others. When we have to be appointed in processes that are there for everybody, you will find that certain historically advantaged companies will continue to benefit unfairly. This KPMG is a clear reflection of what has been happening in the Treasury, and it's continuing not necessarily surprising us, but it adds to the dots that has been always there. This is an addition to what the dots has been, that some are entitled better than others.
In the overall awarding of this contract, let's just take it step by step, because there's an overarching contract that the KPMG was awarded. Then you've got sections within the contract. Now, the first one is that they were appointed without no terms of reference, and they were appointed without, there was no approval of a contract in place. And this is an auditing firm that is flouting regulations, along with Treasury that appointed them into the position in the first place.
This is what makes matters even worse, one would say. That this is the government institution that we expected to be guarding against all. But if you see an institution in this regard flaunting all rules and regulations that are there, West KPMG, it's one of those reputable companies that anyone would say the KPMG, once it has done your books, then you know that the all and all, the gloom and all, the master of auditing has done it. But today, we now know that this firm is the same as any other black firm that is out there that we undermine in general, in most instances, that we would undermine them. But having flaunted the regulations, having flaunted the rules of supply and chain, that tells you what has been happening in Treasury. I would repeat that this is another one of scandalous issues that are coming out and reflect is that those that we have seen to be corrupt in most instances are not necessarily those because they've been found guilty by media. Nonetheless, the facts are clear. When facts are there, one should look at the facts, not what the media want us to believe.
Yeah, we've been touching on this issue since we broke it on Friday, and what has hit me, and I keep repeating it, is that how you get into a situation where, first of all, Treasury is flouting in its own processes, and then you get an audit firm that gets appointed without a contract and without the parameters and the scope of work, and without putting deliverables in place. To me, it's quite shocking.
It should shock South Africans in general. In actual fact, you can expect that everybody else should stand up and say, but we didn't expect this from a department that's supposed to be an exemplary to all departments. In actual fact, it's one of the biggest scandals that we could ever have in South Africa. I'm wondering why other media houses are not even capturing it. Others are downplaying it. This is a reflection of there's been a choice to say that, no, these ones are not corrupt, but those ones are inherently and supposedly to be corrupt. Now you have a bigger scandal here. One of the biggest auditing firm that has flaunted the rules and the regulations in there. And yet you have a way in which others are downplaying it. This is the biggest scandal that we have in South Africa.
Mind you, the Minister of Finance also saying, giving the benefit of the doubt to his predecessor, saying that they will probe this matter. In fact, it is up for discussion in Parliament tomorrow. But we cross now to my colleague Audrey Chimanda for more revelations regarding the KPMG, in the audit report.
Well, thank you once again, Cindy, and to you, Edwin. We continue to look at the KPMG irregular contract, and this is what we have. The report terms it catastrophic. In fact, they say no service level agreement in place for property services, number one, with KPMG. The impact that this has, the lack of accountability, there is no compliance to the supply chain process, there's unauthorized expenditure, irregular expenditure was also cited to be a problem, therefore leading to potential fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Ineffective project management, ineffective contract management. There is no legal recourse, once again, to tie KPMG to, as there is no terms of reference and no paperwork to actually pronounce those recommendations. Now coming in from the Auditor General, action should be taken against officials who engaged KPMG without following supply chain management processes and those who authorized payments in the absence of an approved service level agreement. The response from management says the National Treasury entered into a contract that included scope of work. It was not deemed necessary to enter into an additional service level agreement with KPMG. Auditor's comments with regards to management says no evidence of the contract referred to by management in the comment above was provided to us for audit purposes. Again, no contract referred to, there is no terms of reference, and there's therefore no paperwork that can make sure that there's actually some kind of a line of work with trying to monitor the processes of the supply chain processes. That's what we have for now. Cindy, back to you and Edwin.
Thanks so much, Audrey. And of course, you at home, you're most welcome to join us on social media as well. In studio, we have Mosiri Tsiane. He is with the South African Liberty Foundation, just reflecting on this internal audit that we broke last Thursday. I mean, the findings in the report in itself, the mere fact that there is no existing contract, meaning that there's no obligation, or rather you can't hold people accountable because the specs, the terms of reference, the scope of the work, and there's no service level agreement, means there basically is impunity. Even if you haven't done the job, there's no way of tracking that.
I think, so, like I say, some are more equal than others. You know, KPMG seems to be, all along, if I can recall, a company that has been entitled to government work without any contract. I think there's more of an entitlement than any other thing. It has been a company that at all instances will get the contract, who will not question it because it's KPMG. And if it were another company, for argument's sake, we would question its credibility, we would question why it qualifies to get that work. But with this one, it has been a work awarded to it on perpetuity.
But the legal recourse, though, now that we've uncovered this, is that somehow there needs to be accountability, Tsepo, in that this money either needs to be recovered, but in the absence of a contract, what legal recourse is there?
Well, there are a number of things. First, you got to look at that those that took the decision, an unlawful one, to contract contrary to what the rules provide for, and when there's no contract but engage in pay services, such people need to be held accountable, and most probably they need to be held accountable criminally. Secondly, of course, there has to be an evaluation in those cases where there's overcharge. That money needs to be recovered. If anything, I'm astonished that today is Tuesday. 8 and 7 came up with this expose on Friday evening, and I haven't heard a thing from any quarter about pay back the money, particularly from those entities who it has been shown in this internal audit report that they were paid monies that were not due to them. So this again, of course, is systematic, where we are seeing with most of government procurement, there is overcharging, there is cost overruns, there is payment for services that had not been regularly or procedurally procured. But what is worse is we could even find that this is happening at National Treasury. We have to bear in mind that I think for a long while now, and a number of years, National Treasury has been a typical case of the Bolombolo tiger.
What's the Bolombolo tiger?
Created by the public relations consultants and inflated by the media, the mainstream media.
Let's just put this in perspective. I'm lost as much as you. Let's put it back into perspective, because there are some timelines here in terms of this IFMS project that was started in 2004. KPMG comes in around about 2013 when it's appointed to start the PMO, of which there was no need.
As a project management office.
Correct. And the internal audit says that there was no need for that PMO office. So here you have a company that is within the system that's been pre-approved, so to speak, by government without going out to tender.
Look, we have to bear in mind that the audit firms, by the way, they're not just doing auditing. In fact, they are running very lucrative, highly profitable consulting businesses. And just 2 years ago, we should have all been shocked and horrified to know that the consulting industry in this country was earning over 32 billion rand a year. And yet when you ask, he says, well, what exactly is the value that the state is deriving from funding all of these various consultants? Even people that used to be in civil service, they are now in consulting. We've got audit firms, as I say, that have expanded their mandate, have expanded their scope of services to the extent that they now are earning these billions and billions of rands. So effectively, we need to go beyond just this one contract on the project management office, which was to actualize or implement the IFMS, which was a earlier cabinet decision. A long-standing. So we need to go beyond just this one, where already it has been proved that money was fruitlessly spent. But we need to look at overall and say, are these various consultants guised as audit firms, are they really giving value for money? I mean, earlier we were discussing about the work that is done even by such consultants on entities such as ESCOM, where they do not have subject matter experts, and hence, of course, then the outcome becomes really, we now know the results of what comes out of there. But this, I think, if anything, tomorrow when Minister of Finance goes to Parliament, it is effectively incumbent upon him to detail everything around this contract, not only in terms of the internal audit report, because as I've been mentioning that from this PMO, however dysfunctional that it was, as we now know, they proceeded to even go now and procure the IFMS system from Oracle, and we as a nation need to know what are the license fees that are payable per user, how many users are there, what is the absolute value in rent terms that will be payable to Oracle over the life of the contract, how long is this contract going to be, but also what were the circumstances that led them to even ceased with the report that was there. What led Minister Pravin Gordhan to continue procuring when he had an audit report that said, listen, this is wasteful expenditure. Those are the critical issues, and one can only hope that tomorrow the members of Parliament, the parliamentary committee will be better prepared, if anything, to be able to ask the right questions and demand the right answers, so that as a nation we can know. We can't afford to continue to be in a state of where we are uninformed, or there is this confusion, and yet billions of rands have been wasted.
Oh, okay, let's go to Tony Modise. He's an economist joining us on the line. Tony, we're talking about how KPMG got this contract at Treasury without several processes in place. For instance, your appointment contract, your due diligence. What is your take on it?
This is very shocking. It's very different. So, I mean, taking KPMG as an auditing firm. An auditing firm is a firm that you will count on when it comes to regulation, when it comes to processes. And now, when it comes to cases like this, it becomes quite shocking. I mean, looking at the company's track record, how the company has been performing throughout the years, and how respectful they have been throughout the time. So this is quite shocking. It was really not expected at all.
We know that the processes were flouted at Treasury in terms of this appointment and no service level agreements in place.
Yep.
Is it incumbent upon a company like KPMG to say, no, hang on a second, let's do this by the book?
I mean, a company like KPMG, I mean, having an agreement or a service agreement with Treasury, I mean, there needs to be a track record. There needs to be a paper trail. Off-take agreements needs to be in place. So, I mean, in this whole situation, it was something that was done through a handshake. So it is really not allowed.
All right, Tony,
considering their reputation and all that.
All right, please stay on the line. We get more details of the internal report. And this time we're looking at KPMG and the government spent for essentially work that has not been done according to the report. And it further states that there was no approved statement of work in place for KPMG Probity Services 1 and 2. And we go across to Audrey now for more details.
Oh, thank you very much, Cindy. Again, taking a look at the dealings between the National Treasury and KPMG and the flaws that we've found within the internal audit report. First, we look at how the report has been termed catastrophic once again. There's no approved statement of work in place for KPMG Probity Services, and as a result, timeliness, issues of costs, deliverables, and resources associated could not be determined. The impact this has is a lack of accountability, ineffective project management, also an ineffective contract management. Recommendations from the AG as a statement of work should be defined, approved by both Treasury and the service provider for each service or deliverable to ensure effective contract management. Let's now take a look at what management comments. They say there is no need for a statement of work that would essentially include the same information as annexure to the contract. The auditor's comments with regards to that is there is no evidence of the contract referred to by management was provided to us for audit purposes. Of course, the pattern there that we're seeing from auditor's comments, once again, a statement of work is an essential formal document for defining the scope and measurement of work, and it is definitely required. Back to you, Cindy, and your guests to further analyze.
All right, thanks so much, Audrey. Just the rudimentary processes or doing due diligence when it comes to finances and for auditing firm of such high repute, why would they not apply the same disciplines, if you will, in running two projects? There are two contracts, Probity 1 or Probity Services 1 and 2, which essentially is to oversee the entire process to make sure that money is allocated and resources are spent where they ought to, and yet there's no contract in place. Is it to conceal what is going on, or is it just oversight?
Well, it's nothing else but a corrupt activity. That's how you can label this. It's no other way in which you can label it. What KPMG seems to be having is a blank check. It's clear. They determine what their terms of reference would be. They would work the way that they would want. They would bill in the same manner that they would want. In essence, this is an absolute corrupt activity. It should be investigated. In actual fact, I'm surprised why there isn't any reaction to this. This is by far the biggest corrupt activity I've ever seen. An auditing company is giving a blank check in a National Treasury Department. What else can you define it? How else can you define this kind of activity, except to say that it's an absolute corrupt activity?
Tsepo, in the process of the internal audit committee checking what happened, you saw the comments coming through from management saying, we would be duplicating if we were to perhaps draw up a statement of work, for instance, because it's part of the annexure, and the auditors responding saying, but that's part of what is required. It's that kind of flouting of regulations that is quite worrying.
Well, look, I mean, this is not an isolated case. In fact, it's widespread. My previous life, I'm aware of one state-owned company, which I had the misfortune of chairing, where at least 100 million rand was spent on consultants, and there was no value that could be derived from there. But let's look at this particular case. 59 million rand worth of man hours is a lot of hours. And those hours, they needed to have been spent on something that could be tangibly demonstrated that it is of value to the enterprise. So what we are seeing here is that you cannot go and spend that amount of money and have nothing to show for it. We're talking about BIS technologies, which also, again, the potential overpay, and it would appear that they were overpaid by 12 million rand. But over and above that, if we were to take into account the man hours that they would have put into this contract, you can clearly see that here there is nothing but really wastage at the grand scale. Question is, what are they going to do? What will the minister do? Now, what surprises me is that Minister Malusi Gigaba continues to be wax lyrical about his predecessors and the previous senior management, despite the facts that are staring him in the face that, listen, a lot of things have gone wrong and have gone horribly wrong. And the more he continues to be wax lyrical about them and about what a sterling job that they have been doing, I think that he's going to end up with egg on his face, because when now he finds out that based on the work of the project management office, which has been completely shoddy, completely horrifying, that the minister went on, his predecessor went on then to go and procure on an even much larger scale this amount of money. I don't know how he's going to be able to face the South African public. There was absolutely nothing that compelled him to have to go to extraordinary lengths to be paying tribute to these people, more so as he wasn't really fully seized with the facts. But what this does is that it also distracts him from doing the most important work that the Minister of Finance needs to be doing. The most important work that the Minister of Finance is to be doing is to take care of those entities. He's part of the 90 MPs, by the way, that are calling for the public protector to investigate. So therefore, one of the things he needs to be having the gumption to find the resources to fund the work of the public protector in that regard, so that they can do their work. But also on a macroeconomic policy level, he's got huge issues. He's got major issues that he needs to be looking at, and this is an unnecessary distraction. And the more he disregards it, I think the more he's going to be in pain himself.
Yeah, all right. We have Tony Modise, an economist, on the line with us. Thanks so much for your patience. I mean, all of this still doesn't come to what the desired end goal was supposed to have had, that of having effective internal control processes in National Treasury and across government departments. So how then do we recover the money, Tony? And I think what I'm getting to is possibly a further investigation of government spent on multinationals and consultancy firms that don't give us value for money.
It comes to a level of accountability. There's definitely those that were involved in the whole transactions. They need to be accountable. You just shouldn't be let go. I mean, it's a whole auditing company involved. That's basically the main worry. An audit company and the treasury. The funds of the treasury, it taxpayers' money. So there needs to be real accountability, and records need to be pulled back from those days, the transactions that are taking place, and it should be dealt with from there.
And I know, Tsepo, this is information that you would have very handy in terms of the imbalance of where National Treasury had been accused of being non-transformative and not driving the agenda of a more inclusive economy. But we'll get back to that. Audrey Chimwanda standing by with more details in how KPMG benefited from this flawed process.
And as you said, Cindy, the story continues. More findings there that we are revealing today on ANN7 Prime. No timesheets to justify the amounts billed or paid. As you can see, evidence of invoices that come straight from the internal audit report. The first invoice there dated the 5th, on the 29th of May 2014, an amount that goes just above 540,000, just over R500,000. Another invoice there dated just a month after that, on the 26th of June of the same year, just over 500,000 as well. Another invoice there, again a month after that, on the 30th of July 2014, slightly below the usual amount. This is 315,000, and on the 24th of August, 145,000. Now this amounts to a very huge amount of 1.5 million rand of money that has not been accounted for. There's no paperwork, nothing to trace it and make it fall back on, or to be able to hold anyone accountable as to how that was paid out. The impact, ineffective contract management or ineffective cost management, that also leads to ineffective project management and potential overspending. Recommendations from the AG: timesheets must be attached to the invoices to substantiate the hours claimed by the service providers. At this point, there is no paper trail to make sure that everyone was working on time. How much time was put into this to justify that amount of money? Timesheets should also be compared to the invoice and signed off by a Treasury official. Let's take a look at further recommendations there from the AG. Ensure monitoring of service providers and that the invoice amounts are accurate and are valid. Payments should not be approved for service providers who fail to provide detailed timesheets at this point. There is no proof that everything happened within the timeline that was agreed on, as there was no paperwork or terms of reference. Management's comment with regards to these recommendations from the AG, they say no timesheets are required as the cost of the deliverable as agreed up front. And the auditor also comments on this reaction from management. They do not agree with management view, especially noting the amounts paid in line with the work delivered. They further on say that to say that timesheets are not required when deliverables are agreed upfront cannot possibly be correct. That's all we have for now. Back to you, Cindy, to the main studio.
Thanks so much, Audrey. And of course, the ramification, I think, for me, in terms of smaller players or even micro businesses that try and do business with government, because they are the more lucrative client to have. There's a rigidity when it comes to the compliance that you need to have, the 80-20, 90-10 split, your technical abilities, the ability to even pay for the contract first before the government issues you your money. There's the purchase order, whatnot. How come this was then meant to happen or led to happen in Treasury without following proper processes?
Yeah, bureaucracy, when it goes unconstrained, you end up exactly with the situation that you have, because, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed one becomes king. And that's really what we are suffering from here, that these big institutions, they're effectively the one-eyed kings, and they are ruling all over us, but not to our interest, but anything to our detriment. This reminds me of what my friend Jabulani Mthembu, when he was the president of Santaco, once told me. He remarked this, he said, in the taxi business, when we see a mall opening, we send a taxi, we don't write a feasibility report. When we see a shopping center or a housing development coming up, we send a taxi. And he said we are running 40 billion rand a year industry. As a taxi business, we are carrying 16 million people without any feasibility report. What we are seeing now in terms of this expose, in terms of this specific agreement, hundreds of millions of rands have been spent on writing feasibilities and paper, and there is nothing to show for it. That is a horror story by any measure imaginable. That's why they cannot even produce a timesheet, because at the end of the day, they spend so much time talking. But also, on the other hand, it would be worth reflecting on the following, by the way, that this company we are talking about, the audit firm KPMG, is the same audit firm that inexplicably withdrew its audit services from Oak Bay companies. Now, when we are reflecting on this, it now tells us every reason on why they really disregarded all principles, all ethics, and dished a client that they had no reason howsoever. There was no court order for them to not continue doing audit services when they had been doing audit services for more than 10 years. Now we know that the minister, the former minister of finance, it means that he brought undue pressure on them. Else, how do you explain this wasteful expenditure that he himself, when he was still Minister of Finance, took no action howsoever? By the way, he is privy to this report, and there is no evidence of him having ever taken any action. If anything, we see the companies that are concerned there, that it means that he put them under undue pressure, which itself is unlawful, to have prejudiced other parties, and in this case is particularly Oak Bay. Now, he needs to himself, by the way, he must not be absolved from having to account and answer. And since now he's a member of parliament, we hope that tomorrow he will be in that meeting so that he can be able to shed more light, because if anything, he's more intimately knowledgeable of this very serious situation we are dealing with.
Musiri, I mean, we're not talking about complicated things here. We're talking about a company that's been appointed that's supposed to supply timesheets to say, in hour one, we did this, and here's the deliverable. In hour two, we did this, and this is what you get. No such thing. I mean, it's basic requirements.
Well, it's an open check that they've been having. It is a more of a corrupt work that they've been doing. You don't need to be told what you need to do. You don't even have to account for the work that you must do. So you do as you please. It's more like you're running the department as KPMG. You determine your work. Nobody even questions it, because there are nothing to measure your deliverables. there is no instrument that the department has been put place to say that this is what we expect of you to deliver for us. Now, nothing else can describe this except to say this is a corrupt relationship that exists within the Treasury. It needs to be investigated. We're saying that you cannot, at all times, as SALF, we would repeat that in most instances, you would outlook even your local auditing firms and say, no, they are not credible. You've been looking at this one who's been credible. In actual, the most credible you now discover are without any restrictions. Would it have been any other small company owned 100% by black? It would have been having many stringent rules. In actual fact, it would have been said it is aligned to a specific individual. It would have been said that this company belongs to an ex-president, it belongs to an ex-minister. But in this instance, the KPMG that does as it likes, and an international company having also downlooked, ignored the companies that are there. Many black companies are in there, but you will not even give them the chance to prove their potential within the high-ranking department of Treasury. You will not even allow them that space. In actual fact, you will allow this one to even make rules for you. In actual fact, what it says is that they were running the department. That's what we can conclude. KPMG is running National Treasury. In actual fact, at that time, they've captured that department. They were running it. They were doing as they please.
Yeah, Mosiri, we hope that those are issues that will be ventilated in Parliament tomorrow when the matter comes before MPs. Tony, just some of the recommendations or action that has been taken is that officials were reprimanded, and I don't know how far wider it goes in terms of the corrective measures or remedial actions that were taken. But we know that there was no action taken against KPMG, and just on the surface, one could argue that this is just, we're scratching the surface, and there could be more contracts in government that they're involved in that are also flouting standard supply chain management processes. And there's no blemish on the company. I mean, they merely will probably get another lucrative contract from government. Shouldn't we be more vigilant as South African taxpayers as to where the money goes, and ensure that those that are responsible pay back the money, especially in the private sector? All right, I think Tony's gone. I think for me, the focus is largely on what happens in the public sector corruption, but we forget that with the corruptor, there's a corruptee in the private sector who is benefiting. So how do we hold them accountable?
The African Union, under the chairpersonship of Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, it's about a year and a half ago, released a report that demonstrated, and it has never been disputed, that demonstrated that, in fact, the private sector is the anchor of corruption throughout Africa. That in fact, more than 66% of corruption is private sector led, it is private sector funded, therefore supporting what you're saying, because we sometimes forget that there can be corrupt activities between a private sector entity with another private sector entity. And when you take into account the whole economic activity of Africa as a continent and of South Africa as an economy, for example, then you can see clearly where that is going. So I agree with that we sometimes only limit or believe that corruption is only limited to the state. Of course we have to look at the state, but there is nothing different with a private company, because after all, in any case, if we look at where the world is today, stakeholders are very important, and we as the ordinary public, be customers or otherwise, we are stakeholders. But what needs to be happening now, this is unfortunately a low point in our country. As I say, there was a time whereby we were dismayed by some of the amounts that were in the hundreds of millions of rands. For example, on Nkandla, there was overspending. That has been proved, that there were cost overruns, and we're still waiting for people to be held accountable. But here now we are talking about billions and billions of rands. So the question therefore is, can we now continue to keep silent? Can all of those that have been the ardent accusers, we have seen Democratic Alliance today making the police station a press room, saying that we are pressing charges.
I think we go to Audrey for some more revelations. Audrey, over to you.
Absolutely, Edwin, as we continue to look at more revelations there from the internal audit report, let's take a look at what we have, shall we? No deliverables to justify amounts paid. The report terms it once again catastrophic. No signed service level agreement in place for KPMG's probity service number one. There's two of them. This is the first one that we're looking at. There's an amount of 2.5 million rand that was paid as at the 31st of August of 2015 without any evidence of deliverables at this point. There's no justification for the expenditure at the time of the review. Taking a look once again at the evidence, the invoices dated from the 13th of March in 2014 right up until the 29th of April of 2014, an amount of 2.5, to be specific, 2,552,084.96 was paid to KPMG without any evidence of deliverables or trying to justify why this amount was paid to them. The impact that this has in effective cost management, once again, ineffective project management, potential fruitless and wasteful expenditure, irregular expenditure, and unauthorized expenditure. Recommendations coming from the AG, regular ongoing reconciliations between the expenditure and the completion of percentage and of deliverables. A track budget against deliverables to prevent exhausting total budget without meeting the contract requirements. All IFMS payments should only be approved after quality sign-off on deliverables by independent quality monitors. Perform a value for money assessments and recover amounts paid to the service providers if it is required. Management responds, and their comment is internal audit was told at the beginning that the probity reports would not form part of evidence pack due to the sensitivity nature of that project. Auditor says any withholding of information from internal audit limits the scope of the audit in terms of the standards for the professional practice of internal auditing, more so as this review was commissioned by the audit committee. That's all I have for now. Back to you in main studio.
Thank you, Audrey. Audrey there at the wall giving us some more information on the KPMG contract. One of the recommendations, just to get your final thoughts on this, from the internal report was that the monitoring of overspend should have happened, because at this point KPMG, I think, spent 46 million of that total of 59 million in 7 months, and the 59 million was a contract over 5 years. So you can see how they were going through that amount and sending in invoices that in 7 months they had already scored 46 million.
Yeah, we have a long way to go. But I think that last thing that the viewers at home were shown, I mean, if that's what the management of National Treasury, that's how they responded to the internal auditors, it is not only unlawful, I would say it is near criminal. That type of a response, because fiduciary duty, any disregard of fiduciary duty is on the criminal side, because then it means, well, what is the true intent? To withhold that information on the basis of sensitivity in a country such as ours, in a public institution, with the constitution that we have, that is demanding transparency at all material times, and more so in the public sector, to now have gone and pleaded that, and without having adduced any evidence on why such information should have been regarded as sensitive and therefore withheld from the people that needed to be able to remedy this malady. Now, that is unforgivable. But if anything, let us hope that the South African public, with these revelations, will not only be be shocked and dismayed or horrified, but that they will demand, quite rightly, that corrective action be taken regardless of who is involved, that those that are implicit and those that are found to have effectively been the root cause of this malady, that they should be held accountable and be punished, but due process must take its course. So we're not saying that sentence or convict, without due process. There must be due process, but that due process needs to be detailed. And I think the statement that came out of Treasury today, unfortunately, we didn't have enough details. And let's hope that tomorrow the minister will be able to really give more details as to what he's going to be doing to ensure that this, not only in terms of IFMS, but in terms of right across, not only in Treasury, but the whole state, that there are proper processes without costing us by hiring more consultants. The consultants have been paid more. And auditors, I think in this country what Donald Trump is saying is correct. Break the big banks. You've got the big banks that are doing corporate retail banking, or at the same time within the same bank they are doing investment banking, insurance and otherwise. Here in South Africa we've got auditors who are doing a whole host of other things. Lest we forget Arthur Andersen, a once auditing company that went bankrupt as a result of the Enron debacle and the WorldCom debacle. And that's really where we've gone now. Nothing has changed. We've got repeat offenders who have been extending the scope of their businesses, where you don't know whether you're dealing with an auditor or you're dealing with a consultant.
And I mean, the work, of course, is squarely on Minister Malusi Gigaba in rectifying the situation and exposing whatever malice and rot is in Treasury. And the resistance that he'll probably meet, because as you say, these are companies that have their tentacles in many other government departments that have been enjoying lucrative contracts for years on end, and contracts being automatically renewed. What action would he have to take in making sure that at least as a finance minister, he's got already that not only credibility, but a sense of confidence that he's the man for the job?
Well, it's to have the public protector, as he has indicated, to investigate this. That's one other thing. And also to investigate, he himself should look deep into what these previous ministers has been doing, rather his predecessors has been doing in the department. But let all of us know that, those that were seen or presented a picture as if are holier than all of others, in actual fact, they themselves are more rotten than we can ever expect it. The perception created that these are the people who, when in Treasury, would stand and protect South Africa against the corrupt individuals, that they themselves are the ones who are having an absolute clean governance within their own institution. Today we discover the opposite. But what the minister needs to do is that he should reflect and show South Africans what has been happening in that department and reflect all in totality, so that we know these allegations that are coming forward are not just mere allegations. In actual fact, there are findings that have been there. There's no need to prove or disprove. It's there. It's in a glaring. It's a fact that is standing. Action needs to happen to those that have wronged us. But above all, South Africans must also learn that it is not at all times that you are shown a picture of a corrupt individual and that picture is true. Those that are showing you in the picture have a lot to hide about themselves.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. That's Musiri Dziane from the South African Labour or Liberty Foundation. He's the chairperson there, and he's also with Musiri Attorneys. Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, as always. Thank you so much. Tony Modise joining us on the line, a market and economist on the line. We move on now onto